and a warm welcome to BBC Learning Zone. The Open University is where we begin the evening, and it's a musical start to the night, revealing the differences between the Romantic and Classical periods. Tonight's secondary schools programmes at 2 feature history, as we use archive footage to look at the real and lasting effects of the First World War. Languages return at 4, and we're going to be in Spain, touring the cities of the south first, and then enjoying the fun of the fiesta in Seville. That's followed by working in health and care, advice tonight on communicating with colleagues and clients, and then how to improve learning and effectiveness. And then we come full circle at 6, returning to the OU for a look at the mathematical properties of the rainbow and at how maths can be helpful in monitoring endangered species. The shape of things to come from BBC Learning Zone.
Every day, professional musicians like these rehearse and perform music. Most of it is by composers of the past. When the sad tales of love were the theme of our... Today, they're rehearsing a song by Joseph Haydn, one of the great high art composers of the classical period.
For my heart was crushed with longing, what had been could never...
These musicians are rehearsing a song which can hardly be called high art. It's a popular song by Annie Fortescue Harrison, a leading ballad composer of the 19th century. Most music of the 19th century is embraced in what we call the Romantic period.
And best for me.
When describing music, we tend to use a number of labels to signify musical style. Some suggest periods, the classical period or the Romantic period, for example. Others imply the type of music it is, even the type of audience that the music is aimed at. High art music and popular music, for example. These terms are handy in today's music industry because they provide a set of categories from which similar pieces of music can be marketed. But what do these labels mean to practicing musicians who, every day, have to get behind the notes on a printed page of music and capture the spirit and the style that was intended by the composer?
Lies poor Tom Bowling, the darling of our crew.
How is their approach to music of the classical period different to their approach to Romantic music?
For death has brought him to.
What similarities are there between popular music and high art music?
Of the manliest beauty, his heart was kind.
And what do performers do to touch the true style of music of the past? In this programme, which was filmed at Finchcock's house in Kent, 4 musicians are going to prepare 4 songs. We are going to see and hear how they put on the style. We've come to Finchcock's because it has an important collection of historic keyboard instruments. The tenor John Potter is accompanied by David Rowland on a piano made in the late 18th century. They will perform a setting by Joseph Haydn of the Welsh song David y Garreg Wen, David of the White Rock.
Stay in close one melody depressed with old age, and by sickness worn low. Oh, soothe his darling with the soft notes of woe.
Yeah, okay.
I think it probably needs to move a bit.
Yes.
It's very hard not to put in the... It's a little bit like an artist having respect for the integrity of his materials, really. You have to, even though the music is yours at the moment you make it, you have to put yourself in the position of the composer when he first saw the text that he's going to set. And you have to bear in mind the kinds of criteria that he was thinking about. In the case of 18th century music, there is a particular formal structure and feel to the music that is quite different from even late Baroque music and the early Romantic music that followed it. And I think unless, as a performer, you're aware of that, all the music will come out sounding the same. And so you have to home in on significant aspects of the style.
Just keep the ornament in.
Yes, yeah. And I'll add some more, maybe in the second verse.
Yeah.
I think over 6 or 8 verses, the listeners would expect a bit of variation there.
Yeah. What sort of thing do you want to do?
Well, where it goes, mellifluous strain,
Yeah.
mellifluous, something like that.
Yeah. Not too much.
No. Otherwise, I think you lose contact with the text.
Yes.
We know that performers of the period added decorative notes and phrases to the music, even though the composer had not written them down. Putting these decorations or ornaments in place implants a vital ingredient of classical style.
It's up to the singer to choose the tempo, even the key he sings it in. As far as ornamentation is concerned, it's part of personalising the piece and making it your own. And every singer would have done something different.
Come, sweetest composer of grief and of pain, my master implores one mellifluous strain, depressed with old age and by sickness worn low. Oh, soothe his darling with the soft notes of woe. My youth thou wert frolic, fantastic and wild. My melodies changing to tender and mild. When the sad tales of love were the theme of our lay, in tears would the heroes go weeping away.
It's very difficult to describe exactly what characterises music in any particular period, but terms like balance and restraint, I think, come to mind with the classical period. It's not an inexpressive style. Composers of the period thought that they were being expressive, and indeed they were, but they tended to avoid the extravagances that occurred later in the 19th century.
Unlike Haydn, the composer of our second song, the Englishman Charles Dibdin, was a popular jobbing composer whose one-man shows provided the bread and butter of his existence. Tom Bowling is by far his most famous and successful song. It was inspired by the death of his brother while at sea. Here, Jeremy Barlow accompanies on an early square piano of the type that was well known to Dibdin.
No more he'll hear the tempest howling, for death has broached him to.
The reason it is classical music is because it has a certain formal structure. And if you overexpressive within that fairly simple formal structure, you risk destroying the whole framework. So you can't be overexpressive, or it sounds as though you're taking the mickey out of the music.
Yet shall poor Tom find pleasant wear.
Though this song was aimed at a more popular market than was Haydn's, it shares features that are typical of the classical style. The sound of the pianos is small and light, and it plays a very discreet part, just adding support to the singer. It never really intervenes in the song.
Who kings and tars dispatches, in vain Tom's life has doffed. For though he's
The form or structure is evenly balanced. Phrases answer each other predictably and in equal proportion.
gone aloft, his soul is gone aloft.
And the expression is restrained and measured. There are no sudden surprises.
I was wondering if I could add any decoration, but I think it's actually so decorated already.
Yes, also I think with the sort of a simple hymn-like,
Yes.
they probably wouldn't have done
Yeah.
that much to it. I think he's adding
Yes,
just as much as he wanted.
The text, particularly the more obscure words like kings and tars,
Yes.
dispatches, and
Yes, I think
Tom's life has doffed. I think that the listener need the best possible opportunity to understand that rather than be distracted by.
I think so, yes.
The training of singers didn't consist of learning how to breathe and how to make a beautiful sound, which is basically what a modern singer is taught. They were taught how to be agile and get round the notes and put across a text. So it is that's another reason why you have to respect the period. Otherwise the music just won't sound as though it means anything.
Here a sheer hunk lies put on Bowling, the darling of our crew. No more he'll hear the tempest howling, for death has broached him to. His form was of the manliest beauty, his heart was kind and soft. Faithful below, he did his duty, and now he's gone aloft, and now he's gone aloft.
this is very light music. The instruments obviously are very light. They're not like a modern piano. And so I sing it in almost like a speech-like way. I wouldn't try and put into it the kind of power that if I was singing a later 19th century piece.
A vivid illustration of the way that musical expression became more expansive between the classical and romantic periods can be gained by looking at pianos. This instrument, which was made in 1801, has a keyboard that spans 5.5 octaves, from here to here. But this instrument, which was built just 25 years later, is bigger and altogether more powerful. And the keyboard spans 6.5 octaves. Literally, 19th century composers had more notes at their disposal. They could write both higher and lower.
Quite a bit of time there.
Yes,
That's
okay.
that's
I'm actually finding it quite hard to hear you because the piano is such a big sound.
okay. It's
The
really
next song was written by one of the greatest of all romantic composers, Robert Schumann. Frühlingsnacht is very short, but in it the composer tries to capture the heady essence of a spring night. The soprano is Evelyn Tubb, and here David Rowland plays a grand piano of the type owned by the composer.
durch die Lüfte hört ich Qualde Vögel singen, das bedeutet Frühlingsdüfte. Und dann fängt's schon
The sound world of the Romantic period is more openly sensuous, expansive and dramatic.
ist mir's doch, als könnt's nicht sein.
The performers seek to capture the nuances of expression.
Because we go against each other.
One of the keys is to understand the relationship between the piano part and the singer's part.
Special.
And am I obliterating you at that point? Because it's such a big piano part. I don't
No,
play too
I
loudly,
don't
but
feel obliterated
Yeah.
there. The balance, I think, on the whole is good. I think at the beginning we've got to watch it a bit.
Yes.
And in a way we can build that into the drama of the
Yeah.
piece. If we could start a bit more
Yeah.
and then treat it like an incredible crescendo up to that point, we might get a slightly more closer to the inich, the feeling of it. you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Should we try that? I don't know how.
No, it will play very, very quiet.
But
This is,
it's
as I said,
the-
it's a big piano part, and
Yes.
it's quite hard to keep it down. But you want to try from the start? or
Let's try
pick
from
up
the
some-
start and then see if we can get this idea of a very, very sort of held in. It's as if she's going to burst.
Yes.
He's going to burst.
Yeah. Okay.
And so he does burst finally.
It can be really quiet at the beginning.
Yeah, I think. Well,
After
let's
that,
try
you
it.
get problems.
I know. I think the background is very important because knowing a bit about the context of the music you're singing can really feed the song. And style is interesting. If I was perhaps wearing this jacket and hot pants underneath, it would not mix at all, would it? That's great for me because it means
Yes.
I can put more breath into the
Yes.
sound and make it
Yeah.
more überm Garten, as if
Yeah.
I was speaking it.
I can keep bringing it back. It's just when the sound is building
Of
on the
course.
instrument. You can't
Let's try that again. I like that.
Okay.
I mean, I hope Schumann would like it. But it feels
Well, it's
right.
what is written into the music.
Well,
so-
that's right. Maybe our instincts finally overtaking. Interesting to think that this is the piano sort of that he would have used. So,
Yes.
so he had
yes.
this.
Schumann had one very much like this.
Yes. So he would have been working with that intention, really.
Yes. I think he was really revelling in the sound of the instrument too, because the piano part is completely independent of your
Absolutely. I mean, you could actually just play the beginning of that without me completely,
part. Yes.
and it would
Oh,
make
yes.
a
It
piano
does
solo,
very
wouldn't
nicely on
it?
its own.
Überm Garten durch die Lüfte hört ich Wandervögel singen, das bedeutet Frühlingsdüfte. Und dann fängt schon an zu blühen.
Romanticism somehow has a sort of heart-on-sleeve feel about it, I think. It's overtly expressive. That's one thing. I think I would also say that Romantics were trying to go for big effects very often. Very often that meant quite loud effects. The Romantic orchestra, for example, is often very large compared with the classical orchestra. And then there's also the sort of very homely quality of Romanticism too. They often go in for very short pieces, like the Schumann song, actually. It's a very short song, and it tries to encapsulate in that small time something very important, something very expressive.
The range of expressive sounds of the piano was exploited by the Romantics. Indeed, by the middle of the Romantic period, the piano was one of the most written-for instruments. New designs and manufacturing techniques led to tens of thousands of them being produced. The majority found their way not into great concert halls, but into the parlours of middle-class homes. It was particularly fashionable for young women to learn to play and sing. The songs that served this large new market had to have immediate appeal, but also had to be easily performed by amateurs. By the 1870s, women, who were initially the consumers of this type of music, were among the most brilliantly successful composers of it. Such a woman was Annie Fortescue Harrison. She was also known by her married name, Lady Arthur Hill.
I'm going to really try and do this verse as softly as I can. I don't
Oh,
know,
right, okay.
just to get this feeling of the twilight.
That's nice, yes.
If we can, because
Her In the Gloaming is accompanied on an upright piano. The performers are keen to capture the expression of the song in its own terms.
my darling, think not bitterly of me. The structure of the song is so folk melody. It's a sort of tune that you'd go away whistling.
Oh, it is,
And
yes.
it has some wonderful naivety to it, simplicity.
Yes, it's very effective.
But the sentimental value is... And you were just mentioning about that the word sentiment has been sort of...
Yes, well, I mean,
used like
sentiment is all right, you know, that means feeling, but sentimental has become a word we tend to use to apply to Victorian songs of this. Yes, but in fact, this has genuine sentiment.
It really does. It opens the heart, and I think that's probably what we... Well, it does mine. It's great. I'm enjoying this.
Yes.
That interrupted cadence.
Yes.
Too, I
Yes.
think
How do you want to
that.
sort of place that note?
I wondered about that. You did a lot. It says best for you, and it's sort of like it's a kind of piloting that there is more to come. There is a deeper level to go.
That's right. Yes.
There? So best for you and best for me. So that's what I said. Is we actually broaden it even more.
Yes.
Now, the second verse, you sounded so beautifully piano on there. That wasn't a strain for you, was it?
No. Do you feel I'm a bit too loud generally? No.
I mean, the character of the song is so intimate.
Yes,
isn't
it is.
And
Yes.
it's so sort
But if
of,
you feel I should be generally playing a bit softer,
no,
do you?
I think you just
Yes.
go with the phrases.
Yeah.
It's lovely, isn't it? Because you've got the melody line all the way through.
Almost
so if I
that
ever
way,
have
yes,
to struggle for a note,
Apart from that exposed 2 bars there,
yes,
just the lights are dim and low.
Just leaves it there.
Yes.
Actually, that's probably when you need it most. Should we just try it again and see if there's anything else?
Well, from the top.
See if anything else comes forward.
Yes, that'd be good. Yes.
What we may see as mere sentimentality was, in Annie Fortescue Harrison's sound world, genuine romantic sentiment.
In the gloaming, oh my darling, when the lights are dim and low, and the quiet shadows falling softly come and softly go, when the winds are sobbing faintly with a gentle unknown woe, will you think of me and love me as you did once long ago? It's a brilliant setting of it, isn't it? I was just thinking as I was singing it, I could almost speak it.
Yes. The words.
You could almost play you play the accompaniment, and I could almost speak the poem.
But
Anyway,
just begin.
like that. Just in the gloaming, oh my darling, when the lights are dim and low. It's as if somebody couldn't sing, they could still get a lot of pleasure from just singing it, speaking it and making the sound that you make the music and I did the poetry.
Yes.
Which is lovely. I could see that happening with one of these gentlemen with a big voice and speaking it, puffing away at a cigar.
Though it is wrong to periodize too strictly, style is identifiable in music. We all know it's there. We can hear it, we can feel it, we can identify its ingredients. Style labels, like classical and romantic, signify periods when most pieces of music seem to share certain characteristics. Those characteristics go to make up what many musicians call the sound world of the period. Performers need to understand those sound worlds in order to do justice to the music of the past.
I was always interested in art. Now I want to understand it. You don't need a history of art degree to work in a gallery, but sometimes it helps. Whoever you are, wherever you are, the Open University comes to you. To find out more, call us on 0870 900 9584.
The richness and diversity of Hindu life in Calcutta, explored at 1:30 here on BBC Learning Zone. After a look at religious belief with members of 5 different religions in Liverpool's multi-faith community.
This used to be a church, the Welsh Prestatyn Church in the Wavertree area of Liverpool, but no longer. It's now a Hindu temple and cultural centre. When the building changed hands from Christians to Hindus, did it become a different kind of place? Or are the Christians who once used this building and the Hindus who now come here engaged in the same kind of activity, something we can call religion? For 200 years, Liverpool has been one of Britain's major seaports, with a mosaic of communities marked by different beliefs and practices. It has 2 Christian cathedrals, one Anglican and the other Catholic, and numerous churches and chapels of different denominations. A Muslim population attends the mosque in the Toxteth area, and the Jews of Liverpool have a large Jewish centre and several. The Hindu temple acts as a locus of activity for Hindus across Merseyside. All of these communities have popularly been regarded as religions. This is a centre for transcendental meditation, or TM, in Skelmersdale. Those who practice TM don't consider it to be a religion, although some outside TM have seen some broad similarities. This is a dictionary definition of religion. But we will see that many groups labelled religions either accept the word with qualifications or, like TM, reject it outright.
I think the word religion is often both misused and misunderstood. People talk about different religions, New Age religions, all sorts of different definitions. But Christianity is a religion, and a world religion at that, by which I understand it to be a community which holds certain beliefs in common. In other words, it's a faith community, and therefore I prefer the term the Christian faith rather than the Christian religion. But I don't think essentially they're saying different things, because both words imply belief, and it is a set of beliefs which both draws the Christian community together and informs the way in which we try to live our lives. And of course, at the heart of the Christian faith is the assertion that although Jesus, this God-made man, was put to death, yet in a way which we can't possibly fully understand, but which was attested so powerfully by the earliest followers of Jesus, that he was raised from the dead, and that just as he promised, through his Spirit, the Holy Spirit, he is with the community of faith, active in the world now, in a way which is even more remarkable than when he was alive in his flesh, because it's universal and not just in a small country in the Middle East.
I suppose one has to say there is a reaching out by humankind to try to find something which is beyond the ordinary human experience and say, what is it that holds this whole business together? And so one uses the shorthand word God, and I think it's important to say it's a shorthand word, to say whatever it is that holds the whole of this in being, that is God. But the great thing about Christianity is that God is revealed to us in Christ. So that revelation of God in Christ then brings us into the liturgical cycle of Holy Week, Palm Sunday, those events which are talking about the life of the church. And that is all expressing the centrality of Christ who calls us together to be one with him and therefore one with one another.
Give you glory to your Son, Jesus Christ.
Hinduism is not a religion, it's a way of life, because it's a federation of faiths and beliefs. There are so many of us. Diversity is the essence. harmony in diversity. A person who can experience harmony in diversity adds to richness and beauty of life, and he can experience the unity with himself and with others. We celebrate life. During the year, we have so many festivals. Lord Krishna's birthday, Janamashtami, Ram Navami, you see, Lord Rama's day, the Ganesha's day. I can go on describing. It's unending. I remember I was one of the happiest people when I saw the notice board here for sale. I said, oh, this is a call for me to take action. That was a great experience of practicing Hinduism. I met the nicest people, those who were holding the church in those days. I said God's place must remain God's place. You can sell it at a higher price to anyone, but we will also worship the same God which you have been worshiping for so long. And it was marvelous, and we have retained whatever they left for us. They have left the wonderful vibration, and we can feel it that they have been worshipping the same God which we worship, with different names, in different languages, the same prayers, the prayers which have the same meaning, and they go to the same God.
The terms Jewish and Judaism refer to a religion. Judaism, I would say, was the religion. Being Jewish is how you're born. Religion is a belief in a God and having faith in him. The belief in God and the Torah that God gave to us is the heart of Judaism. The Torah was given to Moses on Mount Sinai, and in it are the laws guiding the way that one should live. So the Torah is the way that one lives. This is the law for living. Judaism affects every single aspect of your life, from the most basic physical acts and needs to the most spiritual. It affects can affect your business life. The laws of the Bible, of the Torah, affect all aspects of your life. There are very strict laws about how you deal with people in business, how you deal with your neighbour and your animals and people you work for or who work for you, and how you deal with yourself as well and your family and so on. So it's all pervading in the very positive sense of that word. So it does affect every aspect of your life.
Labelling Islam as a religion is not the appropriate word. People view Islam as being something that consists of rituals. But when a person enters into Islam, when he declares that there is no God worthy of worship except Allah, except the only one God, then he has to put that into his practice for the entire of his life. It's like going shopping and you say, oh, I'll choose this and I'll leave that, I'll choose this and I'll leave that. Islam is not like that. When we embrace Islam altogether. It's not pick and choose.
This way of life, in Arabic, deen, it is not religion, it's a deen, a way of life, which is in accordance to the divine will. Islam means purity and piety, but most of all, it's based on belief in one God. Allah, we call him in Arabic. And this is very important. And this is where the community who actually believes in one God unite together in that belief.
Transcendental meditation is a very simple, natural and effortless technique, and you practice it for 20 minutes morning and evening, sitting in an ordinary chair with your eyes closed, comfortably and quietly. And I found that it didn't require any belief to make it work, that it was very easy. It was actually quite a pleasant thing to do as well. Transcendental meditation isn't a religion because it doesn't involve faith. It works even for the most hard-bitten skeptic, as long as they do it correctly. And it doesn't involve the worship of some higher being. And so I think by any normal definition, there's no religious content there. I think that TM does have a relevance for religion. Maharishi's actually said that transcendental meditation is like cleaning the floor of a church so you have somewhere nice to pray. It's a technique for releasing stress, making a more balanced individual. And I think a more balanced individual will tend to become more appreciative of the religion and the ethics of their religious background.
Although TM distances itself from the kinds of beliefs and experiences which other groups speak, one common feature of all these groups is their sense of community.
The Church of England, like other organised faith communities, has at its heart, usually, a building or a place where the Christian community gathers for worship. A holy place, or if you like, a sacred space in which the Christian family can meet for worship, is a very important part of its life, and it's usual for the Christian community in a local place to attach great importance to its church and to lavish care upon it. I have a very deep sense whenever I stand at the altar here. There's a tremendous privilege in standing where faithful priests and people have stood for all those centuries, proclaiming a gospel perhaps in new ways, but which is forever the same.
It is indeed right, it is our duty and our joy, at all times and in all places to give you thanks and praise.
The notion of community is quite central to Christian faith because there is a real sense in which the human dimension of community requires expression within a faith. And I speak, of course, specifically for the Christian faith and the Roman Catholic tradition, that says, yes, coming together is important, both to express what we are and to inspire what we hope to be. So the Eucharist has that power of gathering the community and they're celebrating. Celebrating is a key word because it's saying that the person who is a Christian should not, I think, see himself or herself as having been given a hotline to heaven, an easy ride, a free ticket. It's a responsibility that says, if you have heard and understood that it is in Christ that God is revealed, then you have the obligation to celebrate that. That is to say, to proclaim it with joy. And in so doing, one hopes that others will want to join that celebration, will want to say, yes, that makes sense, that this is something that we take part in.
Most people who learn transcendental meditation, they just do it in their home or on the train, whatever, and they don't really become associated with the organisation that teaches transcendental meditation. However, for those who are enthusiastic, especially about creating coherence in collective consciousness, then it's more powerful to do that by coming together in a group. The understanding of consciousness is very central to the understanding of TM. Consciousness is actually a field that is throughout the universe. It's a field of energy and intelligence, and it's permeating the entire range of creation. The meditator, when he meditates, produces a very orderly influence from his own individual consciousness into that field of consciousness. And this affects the people around him. typically all the negative social indicators start to improve when there's a sufficient concentration of meditators in the area. Not only does crime rate go down, but also accident rates, suicide rates, divorce rates, a whole range of those kind of indicators. And on the positive side, we find that economic confidence grows. Very typically, the stock market will boom if you introduce a group into an area. It's this field effect of creating coherence in the field of consciousness.
To be a Muslim, one is not only concerned about the affairs of herself or himself. We have to be concerned about others. We have to be part of the community. And this is what makes Islam beautiful. When I go to the mosque, I feel very peaceful. It's something very hard to describe, especially when I meet other Muslims coming in. Everybody's come to the mosque to gain something, to seek the pleasure of God, to come and learn, to greet each other. And it's the most wonderful feeling is as soon as I enter the mosque, it's so peaceful.
Coming to the mosque is very crucial because it stresses on the need to be together, to unite, and to live peacefully together, and build the bridges, and to forget about the differences and the prejudices which might disunite the community. One of the daily practices of a Muslim is to perform 5-time daily prayers, salah. Salah means a constant reminder, a constant communication with God. So 5 times we are reminded of this unity, of this brotherhood, of this community which have to live together in a peaceful manner.
Hindu Cultural Organization fulfills many needs. One of them is sharing, caring, and giving to each other. You know, when we come to the temple, it is social, it is cultural, it is religious. So we come in our own individual families, forming a big family, community. And community for me is common unity. So it becomes a bigger family. So and then we discuss the number of problems which we share, common experiences, common needs, and common values. This center is being used by 90% of Hindus in Northwest. People come all across the Mersey and also from North Wales and all the suburbs. They come here. This is a nucleus of hope and harmony.
The Hebrew word for synagogue is Bet Knesset, which means meeting place. The synagogue is not only a place of prayer, but also is a place to meet. So the social aspect is also very important. Cole is my grandson, and he's got all his friends, all men in their 70s, that he goes to meet. My life revolves initially around Friday, getting ready for the Sabbath, for Shabbat. Shabbat starts on Friday night. It's from sunset to sunset. There is a Friday night service, and men will go to that. Shabbat is described as the queen, sort of the queen of the week. And so the congregation turn to welcome the queen into the synagogue, to welcome Shabbat into our week.
Special days are important to many, but not all of these communities. Shabbat is celebrated not just in a synagogue, but also at home.
I think most homes will have some sort of gathering and some sort of special way of observing Friday night. You will say special kiddush, that's blessings before you eat and break bread and so on. Sabbath, Shabbat, is a day of rest. So you won't do any form of work. Food will be prepared beforehand. You'll all sit down and have a Friday night meal together in the family or with friends. Discuss the week. Tell a funny story you heard or whatever it is. It's a time of sort of physical and spiritual rejuvenation, really. And the restrictions, I mean, lots of people see the Sabbath as a time when you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other, you can't shop, you can't drive your car, you can't. But on the other hand, by not doing those things, you're freed then to enjoy your family, to sit and read a book, to do things quietly together, enjoy the company of your friends and family. And I think it's a wonderful thing. It's a blessing that God gave to us, because the Sabbath is the day of rest after God created the world in 6 days. And so his day of rest, and that's Shabbat.
Coming together on Friday makes it possible for the community to be together and united. It is very important, because on this particular day in a week, during the afternoon, all the prayer which is supposed to be said during the afternoon is substituted, and the imam or the leader would normally give a sermon, a short sermon. And sermon in Arabic is called khutbah. Khutbah means a reminder to the community of their duties and obligations to their fellow human beings and to their family, and so on and so forth.
For Hindus, each day is a holy day. There is no time when God is not, and there's no place where God is not, and there's no being in which God is not. So everything, every time, every place is a sacred place. We generally get together on Sunday, especially because it is convenient time, not for any religious reasons, but because it is so convenient to all of us.
It was very important for the earliest Christians to have a day which was set apart for God, and specifically set apart to do that which the Lord commanded them to do, to meet together, to break bread, to take wine in remembrance of him, not as a nostalgic ceremony, or just because he said so, but because in that act of remembrance, we believe that in a very particular way, we are making present in the here and now the love which he mediated at that Last Supper.
But the people who maintain these special days live in the same world as everybody else, a world where the marketplace is sometimes reluctant to stop.
The shop is a kosher delicatessen and primarily deals with Jewish customers. Our weekly trading is from Sunday throughout to Friday. We are closed on the whole of Saturday, as it is the Sabbath. Friday we have normal trading hours, except for in the winter when we have to shut an hour before dusk. Sunday, of course, is our predominantly busiest morning of the week, and we do our main business on a Sunday morning, where we sell a vast quantity of bagels. They're the most popular product.
Running a Muslim shop, it's no problem at all. In terms of Friday prayer, there are enough women to man the shop, while the brothers go to the mosque to do their Friday prayer, and then we have our break when they come back.
Yes, we have about 10 or 12 volunteers who come here on a regular basis. So there's a good turnaround of people in here, regular fresh faces each day sort of thing.
The traditional Sunday is very seriously under threat. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that it's virtually disappeared in this city. I've been in Liverpool for about 13 years, and when I was first here, the only shops that would have been open anywhere near the city centre were perhaps food shops run by Muslims or those of other faiths. Nowadays, all but one department store is open, the supermarkets are open, clothes shops, all sorts of things which are not concerned with the basic necessities of life, but luxuries and a whole range of shopping are now available on Sundays as on any other day. And I do think that's a loss, but I think there is a more than religious reason for keeping Sunday special. I think it's part of the rhythm of life. I think it's part of the essence of family life, that there should be at least one day when parents can be together, go out together, go and see friends, have relatives round, eat round a table together, which is now becoming increasingly unusual, almost unheard of in some families.
Most people go shopping on a Sunday. Most probably will go on Sunday because we don't have time in the week. All of us have things to do. So it's the most popular day to go out shopping.
Well, I work all week and I find it nice to come out on a Sunday and stroll around.
Well, just enjoy coming out. It gives a break on Sunday afternoon. Otherwise you'd be sitting there, you wouldn't be doing very much. And it's just to get out a few hours.
I realise that we live in an increasingly secular society and that it is not for people like me to impose my belief systems on anybody else. Though I'll fight to the death my right to proclaim them and to live them for myself. I make no apology at all for saying that it's very much more healthy to regard at least part of Sunday as special, and a time when people of faith can unashamedly set that aside, both to give honour to God and, more importantly, to listen to what he may have to say, to inspire them to go out and work in the world to his praise and glory for the rest of the week.
So, the term religion would seem to imply belief and practice which flow from an experience that is concealed or denied by the secular world. This understanding may provide a way of distinguishing between, on the one hand, Christians, Hindus, Jews and Muslims, and on the other, groups like TM. Any effective answer to the question, what is religion, must enable us to make distinctions of this sort.
Exploring the great circle of Hindu life and worship in India's most diverse city on BBC Learning Zone now.
This is Calcutta. By Indian standards, it's not an old city. Calcutta was established a little over 400 years ago by the British. It was thought of as the foremost city of the empire and has always been a cosmopolitan place. For many people outside India, the very name Calcutta conjures up images of poverty. There's no denying there is poverty. But those who visit it may also be surprised by its vigor and liveliness. Most people who live here, like people everywhere in India, follow the ancient traditions and practices we now think of as a religion called Hinduism. But labeling Hinduism a religion will mislead us if we expect it to be a tidy system of clearly defined beliefs and practices. So where in Calcutta should we go to find religion? The answer is almost anywhere. And what should we look for? Almost anything. The most visible aspects of Hinduism in Calcutta are daily worship and annual festivals. Even these don't fall into any one pattern. The most important event in Calcutta's calendar is the festival of Durga. It takes place in October and is a central event in the lives of many Calcuttans. The festival is dedicated to Goddess Durga, the mother goddess who is particularly revered in Calcutta. The public celebration of this festival, the Durga Puja, started in the 18th century, and during India's fight for independence, it was used with pride. The goddess became a symbol of India, the motherland. Nowadays, the Durga Puja period is a national holiday. The festival lasts for 9 days, and on the 10th day, along with her 4 children, the goddess Durga is immersed in the Hooghly, the river which runs through the city.
It is believed that goddess Durga with her children comes to her parents' house and after 10 days she goes back to her in-laws' place. So during these 10 days we worship her here on earth.
The Hooghly is a tributary of Ganga, Ganges to the British, the holy river of the Hindus. The river is sacred and plays an important part in Hindu ritual. Daily worship, or puja, often begins by the riverside. Many of those who come here are migrants from neighbouring states. They have poorly paid jobs, often as porters in the railway station across the river or in the nearby flower market. As they bathe in the sacred river, they offer prayers to the sun god, Surya. Hinduism is not a centralized religion. Its customs vary enormously throughout India. Most people fall into a pattern based on tradition and learnt from childhood, but they're free to add to it or change it with very few restrictions.
ताली बजाते हैं कि शिवजी ध्यान में मग्न रहता है, उनको आवाज़ चाहिए, आवाज़ के बिना उनका पलक नहीं खोलते, इसीलिए घंटी लगा हुआ, घंटी बजाओ, जोर से चिल्लाओ। रोज सुबह नहा करके आ करके यहाँ पूछते हैं, और ऐसे दिन भर जब फुर्सत मिल जाता तो इनका ध्यान कर लेते हैं, उनके नाम पर पानी चढ़ाते हैं, जिनको पूछते हैं उनको याद करके उनके नाम से पानी चढ़ाते हैं।
Living Hinduism retains many of its ancient customs. Like the river, other elements of nature, sun, water, earth, stones, trees, they're all treated as worthy of worship. Little shrines may be created under trees which are considered sacred. Nature plays its part in the Durga festival too. One of the first events is the bathing of a young banana tree. People from all over the city bring the plants to the Hooghly. The banana tree is bathed, decorated, and made human by being dressed in a sari as part of the ritual. She becomes a symbolic bride. She is then taken to wed Ganesha, the god of good fortune, shown with an elephant's head. He is the son of Durga. Durga Puja is also celebrated in other ways. High art is an aspect of the Hindu religion. This dance tells the central story of Durga Puja in a stylized form. Different gods give Durga their best gifts: strength, wisdom, cunning, weapons, and so on, so she can kill a demon Mahishasura, thereby destroying evil and restoring the world. Shupradipta is a student of business administration, but her dancing is much more than a hobby.
I feel that classical dance is a form of religious activity. When I dance, it depends where I'm performing. If I'm performing on stage, there I'm dancing for the audience. But when I'm practicing myself, then I think, yes, I'm dancing for the Lord.
For some people, the festival of Durga is more than an annual celebration. They earn their living by it all year round. This man is actually a potter. But the potters in the district of Kumarthuli in North Calcutta form a special caste who spend most of their time making images or murtis of gods. The worship of images plays a central role in Hinduism. The clay for these images is taken from the Hooghly, in fact from near Neemtala Ghat, where they are finally immersed. The relationship between the potters and the goddess is one of deep affection, not to mention that the festival provides them with their livelihood. Once the images are complete, they're installed in marquees or pandals set up on the roadside, allowing people to glimpse their beloved goddess as they pass through. Durga is worshipped by almost any Hindu who lives in Calcutta. But Hindu migrants from other parts of India bring their own personal gods for their everyday worship. In this ornate shelter, migrants from the neighbouring state of Orissa live and pray to Jagannath. Jagannath is the most popular god in Orissa, just as Durga is in Bengal.
বিয়ে হয়ে গেছে আপনার 20 বছর হবে, 30 বছর হবে। এখানে এসে অনেক দিন হয়ে গেল, 30 বছর হবে। উড়িষ্যা আছে, এই বছরে একবার দুবার যায়, সবাই আছে। এমনি ছেলেপেলা আছে, সংসার আছে, যায় ঘুরে আছে। ভাই আছে, ছেলে আছে, বৌদি আছে, ছোট ভাই আছে। রোজগার করার জন্য এসেছি, পয়সা ধাঁধার জন্য।
In fact, it's through worship that he earns a living. These people are Brahmins, the highest caste among Hindus. The Brahmins are the only caste entitled to perform rituals. They can be seen in temples, in the marquee set up for Durga Puja, and even in ordinary houses on special occasions. In return for their services, they're normally given food, clothes, and money. But even for them, the casual treatment of religious images is not sacrilegious. When an image has served its purpose, it can be discarded. These Orissa Brahmins live here in 8-hour shifts, with father and son sharing the same space. They may be the highest caste in the religious hierarchy, but in material terms they're poor. Some do have paid employment of the most humble kind, but most of their living still comes from religious duties. They go out to shops and commercial establishments, where each shopkeeper has a few gods who must be worshipped before business starts for the day. It's the Brahmin who conducts this worship, nowadays normally for a fixed monthly fee. So most Hindus, not being Brahmins, have to call upon the priestly caste from time to time. To this extent at least, Hinduism is an organized religion. But ordinary daily worship at home is something that people do for themselves, whatever their caste or occupation. Dr. Dhar, a heart specialist, is not a Brahmin.
I have my own deity, I worship them every day. So in that, the practice that I do have today, this has also evolved very naturally over these years. Not that what I practice today I was practicing 3 years, 4 years back, not at all. I cannot explain it in so many words, but there has been elemental change over these years that I have felt in myself since I have started this puja and all that. But then, you see, if you ask me to express it in so many precise words, it will be difficult for me, very difficult for me.
Even within the same family, worship or puja takes different forms and has different meanings for each member. Dance is not the only way that Shupradipta, Dr. Dhar's daughter, worships.
Every day after taking bath, I go into our puja room where we keep all our deities, and I try to concentrate on what I had done last few days, what I should have done and what I had done, and what I should do with the day, and to make the best of it, both for myself and everybody around me.
At the end, Shupradipta lights incense sticks. Normally, Hindus don't blow any light out with their breath, not even matchsticks, because light is divine. For Kali, Dr. Dhar's wife, worship involves service to her family. Housework is part of worship. As a traditional wife and mother, she cooks, cleans, and keeps house, albeit with the help of a few servants. Here she's pouring out holy water or Ganga Jal from the Hooghly River, which Dr. Dhar uses in his daily ritual. Cleaning the puja ghar is worship for her. She has to do the cleaning herself, for servants normally belong to a lower caste and don't enter this room. before she leaves, she drapes her sari around her shoulder as a mark of respect as she bows to the gods. But there are occasions when all the people in the house, including the servants, pray together. The oldest member of the household, Mr. Puri, performs the family rituals associated with Durga Puja, the 10-day festival. This worship is performed in a more public space, allowing room for all to participate. As part of the celebrations, everyone is presented with new clothes. Durga is just one of Mr. Puri's deities.
Some of the gods I have taken in my prayers from the childhood, but some of the gods I adopted later on also. Actually, all these gods and goddesses are the representation of the same almighty power or God, which we called Brahman. And according to their qualities or functions, we give them different names. I choose these gods for my prayer on a particular day, depending on my mood. When I am in a particular mood, I invoke that god or goddess. That gives me more solace and more peace. That's why I do not stick to only one god or goddess.
Apart from street shrines, the temple, known as mandir, is the normal space for public worship. Although most Hindus do go to temples, there's no compulsion to do so. Indeed, you could be a Hindu without ever going to a temple. This complex in South Calcutta is dedicated to goddess Kali. Like most temples, it has a thriving market just outside. Traditionally, cities in India have grown around temples because the marketplace has been an important part of the complex. Hinduism has never had rigidly separate categories of the religious and the secular. This area is Kali Ghat, known for its love of Kali. The worship of Kali predates the founding of Calcutta by the British. Some stories even claim that Calcutta got its name from Kali. Indeed, Kali is worshipped throughout the city and is regarded as another form of Durga. At the other end of Calcutta is Dakshineshwar, another famous temple dedicated to Kali. Hinduism generally is not an organized religion. It leaves people free to worship as and when they please. But temple life is more structured. Communities come together to build and run them. Certain times of the day are considered particularly sacred and auspicious. At these times, the official priest, again belonging to the Brahmin caste, has to make ritual offerings to the deity. The temple is the earthly home of gods and goddesses. They are treated as if they were honored guests. Here, Kali is bathed, dressed and fed as if she were a human being. She is offered water, cloth, flowers and a fan to cool her in the hot weather. Kali is Durga in another terrifying guise. She is the force of destruction necessary before any creation occurs. For all her ferocity, she is still the mother goddess, treated by worshippers as part of their family. She wears red bangles, a sign of being married in Bengal, and she has a set of keys tied to her sari, typical of many married Bengali women who wear their keys as a mark of their status, revealing that they run large households with kind firmness. It's not only Kali who's worshipped here. Krishna, the god of love, and his consort Radha are also worshipped. Several temples dedicated to Shiva also form part of the same large complex. Dakshineshwar had a famous priest, Ramakrishna. He was a 19th century Hindu holy man, particularly revered for his piety. Ramakrishna himself is now worshipped, and across the river is this temple at Belur Math, dedicated to him.
He is considered to be an incarnation of God, so it is he who is being worshipped. We call it in Bengali Manush Puja, man as God. He is being worshipped. In the morning and in the evening, he is worshipped inside the temple, inside your heart. He is held up as an ideal of human beings, spiritually and also materially.
Belur Math is the headquarters of the Ramakrishna mission. It was established by Vivekananda, one of his disciples who took Hinduism to the West. In its turn, the organization of Belur Math has itself been influenced by the West. Reverential silence is the norm here.
There is a serene atmosphere prevailing all over the campus. Once you get into it, you are in a completely different atmosphere. And the temple is a place where anybody from anywhere has an easy access.
The architecture of Belur Math is modern and quite different from traditional Hindu temples. Elements from Muslim and Christian architecture are fused with Hindu icons, and in places we can see a Buddhist influence. The institution believes that this reflects the composite culture of India and the oneness of all faiths. In keeping with this, Belur Math marks the major festivals from other religions. But its most important celebration by far is of the same Hindu festival as the rest of Calcutta, the Durga Puja. Throughout Calcutta, people have very different personal religious habits, and nowadays with urbanization, different lifestyles. Yet they come together to organize the festival, to decorate the marquee or pandal, to pray together, to eat together, and to indulge in endless hours of gossip. And it's time spent with the family. Because the belief is that Durga comes back to her mother's house, children, no matter how old they are, go back to their ancestral homes. In a country where increasingly people leave their own states to work elsewhere, sometimes moving hundreds or even thousands of miles, the puja ensures that a family keeps in touch with all its members. The festival is a social as well as a religious occasion. People don't spend all their time at worship. On the 10th and last day of the festival, the women give Durga and her children what amounts to an affectionate farewell party. They're even given pan, the betel leaf chewed after a feast. Durga is smeared with a red powder shindur, a sign of being married. The greatest blessing a woman can have is Sumangali Bhava, may you always remain married. While the women play with Shindur, their men watch with appreciation and indulgence. And then Durga is taken for immersion. But before that, all night-long celebrations are called for. For 3 nights during the festival, nearly all of Calcutta is on the streets. People go from one celebration to another, totting up how many pujas they have seen. Public transport runs throughout the night, and religious music has given way to film songs and folk tunes which blare out from the marquees. It's a time for buying special festival presents. A fantastic display of lights has more to say about modern lifestyles than about the traditional stories of gods and goddesses. No one disapproves of all this, not even the most devout. Indeed, icons from other religions too are absorbed and become part of the celebration. Hinduism is all-encompassing, able to absorb any experience that life provides. Even in contemporary secular India, it's difficult to establish the boundaries of Hinduism and thus a distinct compartment which might be tidily labelled religion. Many Hindus would simply say that Hinduism is their way of life.
Do you fancy a career, or are you already working in health and care? If so, whether you're a nurse in a high-tech hospital or a care worker helping people at home, the series Working in Health and Care is for you.
Had been born. It was very exciting.
How to Build a Human, part of the BBC's Gene Story season next Sunday at 9 on BBC Two. Prepare to brave the new world.
Here on BBC Learning Zone in half an hour, how the lovely Eliza Doolittle bloomed in the imagination of playwright George Bernard Shaw. But before meeting the Living Dolls creator, it's time to contemplate the grand scheme of things.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light." And there was light.
Philosophy has never been afraid of tackling the really big questions. The creation of the universe could be regarded as the province of religion, and most of the world's religions have creation myths, and most believe that the universe was created by a single God. But science has given us an alternative. The Big Bang hypothesis has explained the beginnings of the universe without bringing in any supernatural being. It might seem foolhardy to try and work out the merits of religion and science. But even if philosophy cannot give a definite answer, it can help us understand the differences and similarities between the religious and scientific approaches. But is it possible to accept the science and still believe in a creator God? What are the arguments on either side, and are they any good? Are science and religion fundamentally incompatible?
It does depend what kind of religious belief you're into, I think. If you're one of the people who have to take the Bible literally, then I think, yes, you've got considerable trouble. If you're prepared to take that sort of thing more figuratively, then it gets easier. And if you're not too bound to traditional faith as interpreted centuries ago, then it gets easier still.
The Big Bang theory argues that at the beginning of time, everything in the universe was squashed together, and out of a single explosion, the entire universe and all the laws of physics, space, time itself, and all the conditions necessary for life were created. Not all scientists believe that the Big Bang theory is incompatible with a belief in God. Indeed, some scientists believe that the very nature of the universe actually supports the idea of a God. The laws of physics had to be so finely tuned in order to produce life that it's inconceivable that in the chaos of Big Bang this could have happened by chance.
Suppose one was given the task of designing a universe for oneself, an imaginary universe which was going to be suitable for life. How would it turn out? Well, if it began with a Big Bang, like this universe did, your first decision is how violent to make the Big Bang. Now, if you make the violence a little bit less than it actually was, you think there's overdoing things a bit, so let's turn the wick down. What happens then is that all the gas comes out and it slows down because of mutual gravity between all the parts of the universe, comes to a halt, and then everything comes crashing back together in what we call a big crunch. And that will happen in a time less than 12,000 million years, which is how long it's taken for us to put in our appearance. So if you turn the wick down, you get no life. So you may say, well, okay, in that case, I'll err on the other side. For safety, I will make my Big Bang a little bit more violent. Now what happens is that the gas comes out, and instead of inhomogeneities forming, all the gas just disperses because it comes out too fast. In which case, without any stars, you're not going to get life. Now, it turns out that the window of opportunity is incredibly narrow. It's very easy to have your violence too small or too great. In either case, no life. This particular universe hits it absolutely on the button in between those two extremes, which is very strange. Now, that is the first coincidence. You've got to get your Big Bang absolutely right in its violence. You then got to think, well, how am I going to build the stuff of bodies? Because out of that violent Big Bang, all you get are the two lightest gases, hydrogen and helium. So in your imaginary universe, you've got to be very careful to make sure that you get stars. So, for example, when you're thinking about how strong to make your gravity, you might initially decide, well, I'll make gravity less strong. Be careful, because now you only collect a small amount of gas. It will not raise the temperature sufficient to ignite the nuclear fires. you get no stars and no life. So you may say, oh, in that case, I'll veer on the other side, I will make my gravity stronger than it actually is. Well, now you collect so much gas together, the temperature rises so much that when the nuclear fusion processes are triggered, they go off so fast that the star burns out in no time at all. Well, in 1 million years, which on this scale is no time at all. And so, again, no life. So you must get your gravitational force exactly right. And again, this universe does that. Not a strange coincidence. And I could go on. There's a whole list of, well, what do you call them? Coincidences. All necessary in order for there to be life.
Professor Stannard is putting forward a version of the argument from design. This was made famous in the 18th century by the philosopher William Paley. The argument from design is one of the classical philosophical proofs for the existence of God. Paley argued that if you happened upon a mechanical and intricate object like a watch, then you'd automatically assume that there was a watchmaker. So, by analogy, if you consider the intricate nature of the world, then you should look for a divine watchmaker.
William Paley was famously impressed with the eye, indeed virtually all other bits of the body, but the eye was the one he dealt with first in his book, and so that's one that's often been a favourite since. It is obviously very complicated. It does a beautiful job. It has a lens which has variable focus. It has an iris diaphragm which opens and closes to let in different amount of light depending upon how much light there is coming in. It has an exceedingly sophisticated retina, which is a sheet of millions of light-sensitive cells, each one connected up via a sophisticated set of interconnections with the brain. So this is a very, very complicated piece of apparent design, and it's no wonder that before Darwin came along and explained it, people thought they had to resort to a divine creator.
Darwin's theory of natural selection argued that species evolve step by step, and only successful species last long enough to pass their genes on to further generations. But what exactly is going on here? We need to look at the structure of the arguments to find out what's being asserted and what's being denied. A logically watertight form of argument is the deductive argument. Let's take a simple example. Premise 1, Max is a cat. Premise 2, all cats have 4 legs. The conclusion which must follow is that Max has 4 legs. But the argument from design is a different form of argument. It's an inductive argument. Inductive arguments start with evidence from observation from which they infer a likely conclusion. So let's take the argument from design stage by stage. The first premise is that living organisms are ordered in such a way as to be perfectly adapted to their environment. The second premise is that available evidence suggests that where there is order, something or someone consciously imposed this order. Therefore, the likely conclusion is that God imposed this order. Darwin's theory of evolution denied the second of the two premises. That is, evolution provides an alternative explanation of how order was created. But that doesn't mean that all inductive arguments are no good. Scientists, philosophers, and all of us use this kind of argument all the time. Let's go back to the modern argument from design, which looks for explanations of the beginning of the universe. Is there a parallel to Darwin here?
One possibility is that it is just luck. I mean, it's certainly possible that the universe is a one-shot universe that came into being, and it came into being with the current mix of fundamental constants, strengths of the forces. That's a possibility. We don't know whether that's true or not. But it's a feasible explanation. Another possibility is that this is not the only universe. This is one of myriads of universes. that there are billions and billions of universes, that they perhaps are still coming into existence. It could be that this universe is spawning billions of universes as we sit here talking. And all these universes are perhaps different, with different mixes of fundamental constants. And it's just some of them, not necessarily one, but in fact this one, as an example, that happen among all those almost infinite number of universes to have the right mix.
So we have two explanations of the order in the universe: the many universes hypothesis, or the hypothesis of God the designer. Which of these two explanations should we accept? Which of them is the best explanation? Well, philosophers and scientists agree that the best explanation is the one which matches three criteria. The first criterion is that any hypothesis should lead us to expect the evidence we can see. Secondly, if the hypothesis weren't true, then we shouldn't expect to see the same evidence. The third criterion is that the hypothesis must be the simplest available. Let's take the first two criteria. How does the many universes hypothesis hold up against testable evidence?
It's an idea that's been put forward by several scientists. That doesn't in fact make it a scientific explanation, which doesn't of course mean it's necessarily untrue, but it's not science. Also, it's not science in the sense that you can never prove it, because other universes by definition cannot be reached from this universe. If they could, they'd be part of this universe. They can't be reached. So you can never verify it. So on those grounds, it's not science. It has to be a matter of faith. So whether you have faith in an infinite number of universes or faith in God, it comes down to faith.
Now, we have to be very careful about what we mean by testable. Religion effectively throws away the criterion of test. It's not a part of the canon of belief. It doesn't matter whether the evidence is for or against your belief. Your belief is stronger than any evidence that might be presented. So religion, to me, is totally anti-intellectual.
I'm fairly happy to live with "I don't know" as the answer to many questions. I don't feel forced to have an answer. And so I'm quite happy to sit light as our understanding grows, as our data comes in, and to gradually formulate the answers. I don't require an answer, just like that.
So neither view is directly testable. The most we can say is that the scientific view may be testable in the future, or science may come up with another view which is testable. But what about the third criterion, the criterion that said the best explanation is the simplest one available?
If you toss a coin an infinite number of times, you're going to have some of these times in which there are an enormous number of heads, which you wouldn't otherwise expect. So the suggestion is we can explain the characteristics of our world by supposing there are an infinite number of worlds and they all have different characteristics, so it's not surprising that one of them has our sort of characteristics. Well now, this seems quite an extraordinarily complicated hypothesis. You are postulating the existence of an infinite number of worlds in order to explain one world. I am postulating one further entity, God, in order to explain our world. The comparison seems just dauntingly different. An infinite number of worlds. We have absolutely no other reason for supposing there are an infinite number of worlds except to explain the existence of ours. All the rules indicate you mustn't postulate more entities than are necessary to explain the phenomena.
I've not heard any explanation from anyone religious, because it's always been an explanation of the form that I hereby pass the buck. Because they say, well, it was designed. Someone sat down somewhere, out of time, out of space, designed it all, and then implemented it. Now that seems to me to be at the same time as being a very lazy explanation because it is passing the buck. It's also a non-explanation because it doesn't actually say what happened.
So again, the answer isn't clear. You could argue that the many worlds hypothesis isn't the simplest explanation, but you could also argue that invoking God doesn't give us any explanation at all. Let's leave this for the moment and go back to the question we started with. How do we explain the apparently unlikely set of circumstances that led to the creation of life?
The plausibility of the argument from design rests on the claim that the order in the universe is very unlikely unless there's a God. And this is the claim that is being denied. And the thought goes something like this. You might think it's surprising that the speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. But it had to be something, so why not that? And similarly, it might look unlikely that the universe was such as to produce life. But it had to produce something, so why not that?
The very fact that we're here at all means that however unlikely, the universe did in fact create life.
Imagine that there's a man that's about to be executed. He's in front of the firing squad, and there are 10 marksmen. None of them have ever missed their target. But on this occasion, for some reason, all 10 miss. And the convict is afterwards interviewed by the media, and they say, isn't it, how do you react to this extraordinary coincidence that they all missed? He said, there's nothing extraordinary about it. If they hadn't missed, I wouldn't be here talking to you. One feels that the convict hasn't quite understood what the problem is.
If the survival of the convict needs an explanation, then surely the creation of life in the universe also needs explaining.
That kind of reasoning turns upon the assumption that the universe was somehow free to have a wider range of laws of physics than it has. Since we don't understand why the laws of physics are the way they are, it seems to us reasonable to say, well, they could have been different. And out of all the range of values which they could have had, only this one gives rise to stars and large atoms to make the elements, etc. But of course it's a big assumption to assume that the laws of physics could have been different. It could be that when we understand more, we'll see that there was only one way that they could have been, for a priori reasons which came before, nothing to do with sort of aiming at the final goal of producing life.
So it might be that there's no question that needs answering here at all. If probability is governed by the laws of nature, then there's just no sense in asking about the probability of the laws of nature themselves. Probability always requires a certain background, and as we know, there was no background before the laws of nature came into being.
We've only come a very little way in answering the questions thrown up by the argument from design. If God is the explanation of order, we're still left with the questions of what kind of God, whether there is one God or many, and who or what is the explanation of God. These are characteristically philosophical questions, the sort of questions we ask if we want to find reasons for our beliefs. And we ask them because usually we like to think our beliefs are reasonable or rational. However, some argue that religious belief is different, that when it comes to God, you shouldn't necessarily look for reason and argument. Rather, you ought simply to have faith. To have faith that something is true, you don't need argument, you need inner conviction.
I believe in a God for two reasons. I must say, as a teenager, I started looking for a proof of the existence of God. Maybe every teenager does. And of course, I didn't find it. And I fairly quickly realised that maybe there is no proof in the existence of God. So I adopted as a working hypothesis, here's the scientist at work, as a working hypothesis, a belief in the existence of God, and decided to explore where that took me. And whilst it hasn't taken me anywhere where there's a proof, it's taken me quite a long way along that road, and I don't think now I would want to abandon that hypothesis. My very strong sense of the presence of God comes in two ways. One is mediated through people, and the other is through the very gathered Quaker meeting for worship, which can, doesn't always, frequently doesn't, but can become very intensely still, with everybody present sensing something extra, something further. The phrase they used to give for this in the sort of 1600s was, the meeting was covered with a sense of the presence of God. And that's my main reasons for believing in the existence of God, those two kinds of experience.
Faith is a central tenet of many religions. Millions of people the world over feel they have a personal acquaintance with God. To them, faith is as real as any proof or evidence. So why are science and philosophy opposed to using faith as an alternative to argument? What's wrong with faith?
Laziness. I mean, it's a cop-out. It fails to use the information that we are gathering scientifically. It fails to use the power of rational argument to deduce from all that we see around us a plausible explanation. It's simple intellectual laziness. And of course, the other flaw is that it pushes the question back to whom made God.
I think the problem is that there's an infinite number of beliefs which could be based on faith. So if somebody says, I simply have faith that X is the case, and you can't deny me the right to have that faith, I would have to accept that, but then I could say, well, I have faith that there's a teapot in orbit round the planet Pluto, and there's nothing you can say that will dissuade me from it. I have faith that there are fairies at the bottom of my garden. When there's an infinite number of beliefs that you could hold as a consequence of a certain kind of justification, I think that rather undermines the validity of that kind of justification. If you have a rational scientific explanation for some process, I mean, suppose you wanted to know why rivers flow downhill and why they meander the way they do, and a tribal witch doctor believes that there's a spirit of the river, a river sprite or something, which actually guides the river downstream, and you explain the physics to him and the fluid dynamics, and he says, yes, well, I understand all that, it's a very good theory, but I expect there's a river sprite as well, doing it at the same time. It's superfluous. We can't prove there aren't river sprites, but if there are, they're not doing anything more than what the physics is doing anyway, so they might just as well not be there. It's the same thing with God and the universe.
We have looked at just one argument for the existence of God, the argument from design. And whether you are religious or not, I hope you'll have seen that philosophy can be used to structure the arguments so that we can see clearly who is asserting what and who's denying what. And this took us to the broader issue of the relation between philosophy and faith. And if you're the kind of person who wants your religious beliefs to be solidly grounded in reason and argument, then proofs of the existence of God will be the kind of thing that you're interested in. On the other hand, if you feel that your religious beliefs can be grounded in faith and conviction, then that kind of thing just won't bother you so much.
I have worried long and long about whether God created the universe in any literal sense. But I've also found that you can be torn apart by that kind of academic question, and then, at least for me, go into a Quaker meeting for worship, which is incredibly still and intense, and can have a very strong, lively sense of the presence of God. And in that kind of environment, those academic questions go out the window, 100 miles away. They're just not important. For me, the most important thing is the sense of the presence of God that I have at times. Not there all the time, unfortunately, but at least some of the time. And whilst I hold on to that as the core, then around that I try and construct a rational faith belief system that is consistent with my science. And I don't have great difficulty doing that.
I'm sorry to say, I think it's awfully easy to hallucinate, and the human brain is extremely good at making things up. When you look up in the clouds and you see faces, when you look at the surface features of the planet Mars through a telescope and think you see canals or even think you see a face, the human brain is extremely good at conjuring up things which are not there. If the brain can do that, how much more easily can the brain believe that it has a personal acquaintanceship with God? To a brain with as sophisticated a power of simulation, if I could put it in computer language, as ours has, it's a doddle to make still small voices, to make the illusion of personal acquaintance. I'm not impressed.
A behind-the-scenes glimpse of Pygmalion now with BBC Learning Zone to discover the influences which drove George Bernard Shaw to create his Cockney Flower Girl.
I tell you, I've created this thing out of squashed cabbage leaves in Covent Garden. And now she pretends to play the fine lady with me.
In classical mythology, Pygmalion carved a statue which was so beautiful that he fell in love with it. It came to life and he married her. Now, Eliza is Higgins' statue, and she came to life all right, but the story ends very differently, despite the fact that Shaw perversely called his play a romance.
I call it a romance because it is the story of a poor girl who meets a gentleman at a church door and is transformed by him into a beautiful lady. That is what I call a romance. It is also what everybody else calls a romance, so for once we are all agreed.
A fine romance with no kisses. A fine romance, my friend. This is, we should be like a couple of hot tomatoes.
Stage directors over the years have often wanted to suggest a more conventional kind of romance between Higgins and Eliza by casting a glamorous couple whose battles seem to be leading up to a passionate embrace. The text permits this sexual chemistry to bubble and then frustrates it.
I haven't got a chance. This is a fine romance.
In the 1938 film version, matinee idol Leslie Howard was cast as Professor Higgins. Shaw would have preferred Charles Lawton, famous for tyrannical Captain Bligh of the Bounty. What would he have thought of Rex Harrison and Audrey Hepburn? But he had died years before the musical My Fair Lady had been written, over his dead body, so to speak.
Michael, I think Shaw had the idea of writing a play on the Pygmalion theme a long time before he actually got down to doing it. What was it in the story that appealed to him, and why did he take so long to get on with it?
I think that he saw the Pygmalion story as a very good vehicle for a number of his themes and obsessions. For example, he wanted to promote the idea that intellectuals, linguists, phoneticians were the people who could really make social change rather than politicians and fighting men. This was a very good vehicle for that. Another of his interests was a feminist interest, the idea of women's emancipation, their economic independence, equality of income. It could be used, the end of the play, for that as well. But I think there was also a subconscious theme, and it is a sexual theme, really. He had the idea of doing this as early as 1897, the meeting of a West End gentleman and an East End girl. And he didn't start writing it till early in 1912, after his mother died. And I believe that that released a certain emotional energy, and that her presence had been a taboo, really, something that stopped him writing it before. There's a lot of his childhood and adolescence rewritten in the play, rephrased. He had come from a sort of ménage à trois. In the home was this person called Vandeleur Lee, who was a great musician and conductor, who taught his mother to sing. Not to speak, but to sing. But they were very close, and this Vandeleur Lee was a mercurial and rather wonderful person. And were they lovers? Was Shaw himself illegitimate? He then later on rewrote the past to make sure that there was no romance. It was all professional, the relationship. But the fact was that when Vandeleur Lee left Dublin and came to London, Mrs. Shaw followed him and left her son, who was extremely hurt by this. And he needed to readjust it, and he did it in this play.
Bernard Shaw was a journalist, critic and playwright with a strong social conscience. He was an active member of the Fabian Society, formed by a group of socialists in 1884, who later wanted links with Labour politicians like Keir Hardie. The Fabians did not support the idea of revolutionary socialism.
The term Fabian itself derives from a 3rd century general whose name can be roughly translated as Fabian the Delayer, who defeated Hannibal by refusing to engage in direct military action, instead avoiding confrontation for a series of military skirmishes.
Shaw was intellectually opposed to violence, yet he urged women of the day to shoot, kick, maim, destroy until they were given the vote.
With the passage of the Third Reform Act in 1884, women were the only significant group disenfranchised. Sex became the significant barrier to enfranchisement.
The campaign for women's suffrage had entered an increasingly confrontational and desperate phase, culminating in Emily Davidson's martyrdom in 1913.
During the period of the writing and initial staging of Pygmalion, the sex antagonism, as it was known at the period, had escalated to the point that playwright and director Harley Granville Barker felt it necessary to speak out against what he thought was becoming the curse of hatred between women as women and men as men.
Shaw wanted a genuine equality between the sexes, equal pay, equal respect, because he thought that men and women were more alike than different. He wanted women everywhere in public life, on health committees, factory inspectorates, and in Parliament.
The only decent government is governed by a body of men and women.
Eliza Doolittle's ambitions weren't for the vote and public office, but for something far more important to the mass of working women: respectable economic independence.
The first productions of the play took place not in London, but in Vienna and then in Berlin. Why was this?
Partly Shaw was fed up with London critics. They had miscast him as a playwright, and they had this terrible habit of praising his last work but one and using it to hit the new work. And he was fed up with this after many years.
Audiences were clearly not ready to come in sufficient numbers to plays like Shaw's Misalliance and Harley Granville Barker's Madras House. Instead, they preferred a kind of pseudo-intellectual play, something like Edward Knobloch's My Lady's Dress, which had a phenomenal run in 1914 at the same time as Shaw's Pygmalion.
At last, after years on the fringe, when Pygmalion opened at His Majesty's Theatre in April 1914, Shaw had a mainstream success, complete with box office superstars.
It was not a play written for a repertory theatre season. It was a play written specifically for the West End, for the star system, and for a long run. He deliberately wrote the play with Mrs. Patrick Campbell in mind, a major star of the West End, and for a man like Beerbohm Tree, whose career was based upon successes in the West End conservative theatre.
Pygmalion has outlasted rivals which have turned out to lack the adaptability of a classic, though at the time Shaw went against the grain by refusing to indulge the popular taste for a Wedding Bells finale.
The most successful plays in London during this period were the so-called girl musicals, staged at the Gaiety by impresario George Edwards. These were unashamed celebrations of consumerism. Plays about the Cinderella story, rags to riches tales of young poor women who ultimately marry into the aristocracy.
Mrs. Pat's Eliza was no Gaiety girl. She later admitted she was some 30 years too old for the role. What brought audiences flocking to His Majesty's was the headline-grabbing use of a word that no polite Cinderella had ever uttered before.
Mrs. Patrick Campbell had to use a word which the Daily Sketch cannot print. Instead of protesting, the large audience rocked with laughter. In fact, for a whole minute, everyone was convulsed.
Was the use of the phrase "not bloody likely" shocking at the time? Yes and no. The press loved it because it gave them the opportunity for a lot of coverage. It was called Shaw's naughty word play. The audience found it surprising that such a phrase would come out of the mouth of Mrs. Patrick Campbell, whose career had been built upon representing proper drawing room behavior on stage. Eliza Doolittle is really at one level Shaw's attempt to puncture the Cinderella story, the rags to riches scenario. Audiences, however, I think really embraced her triumphant process and refused to allow Shaw his anti-romanticism. To the extent that the play was successful, I think it was successful because audiences saw it as a celebration and not an attack upon romance.
All your roses, $2.50 a bunch. Today sung out you like $2.50 a bunch.
Help yourself, sis.
Covent Garden is such a respectable place now. But when the fruit and vegetable markets were here, it housed an altogether richer social brew. It was an upside-down world where night became day, and on a chilly morning like this, the pubs would still have been open. "You are a disgrace to the noble architecture of these columns," says Professor Higgins to Eliza. But if a place can change its meaning, how much more so can the words of a play? A very different reading of the play was offered to an even larger cinema audience in 1938. Gabriel Pascal's film cut the play's intellectual content in favour of spectacle. Much of the play's original socialist thrust was lost and its feminism diluted. What crept into his film on the eve of World War II were echoes of more unsettling images. The lone eavesdropper on a darkened street.
What did he do with his mouth?
He opened up the play for the film to some extent. There are great ballroom scenes and so on. They don't add a great deal to the content, but there's one thing I think they do, and that is they add to the contrast within the film. On the one hand, there are the great, smart, social ballroom scenes and so on. On the other side, the Frankenstein experiment in the laboratory, creating this new creature. And there is a very slightly sinister air which runs through it, particularly when you think that it was filmed in 1938.
There's almost an air of the torture chamber about the experiences that poor Eliza goes through, and her nightmares and her desire to say the right thing, to please.
Yes.
It's quite forbidding, I think, sinister.
Yes, it is, and Shaw makes it very clear that Professor Higgins is a scientist, that he is quite ruthless. He is Dr. Frankenstein, a modern version of Dr. Frankenstein. It's not just a romances, it is a social experiment. And it's not soft, as it were. It's quite bullying.
No, no, no. Do it again.
I'll try.
No, no, no. I've told you 500 times. You drive me mad, girl. Come, Higgins, be reasonable.
Ew!
Shaw's play had originally proposed a positive view of science rather than this somewhat ominous suggestion of social engineering. He believed that intellectuals rather than soldiers and politicians could bring about social change. Even an academic could be a hero with the power to change the world by changing the way people speak, though it's doubtful whether a scholar like Henry Sweet would have thought he could transform the world, let alone make a fortune from the rising middle classes.
Henry Sweet was reader in phonetics at Oxford from 1901. Certainly Shaw knew him, and he comments explicitly on him in the preface to Pygmalion, denying in some ways that, of course, he was absolutely the model, but there are touches of Sweet throughout the play. I mean, certainly in terms of the rise of phonetics as a science, Sweet's name is very much in the forefront. He engaged with a new kind of scientific rigour in terms of the description of sounds, developing and implementing transcription systems, trying to bring phonetics as the real new science of the late 19th century, early 20th century.
When the sugar merchants of Liverpool began to speak fine, they eagerly adopted the thin Cockney A in ask, which many of their descendants keep, I believe, to the present day, long after this mincing pronunciation has been discarded in the London dialect.
Coincidentally, Henry Sweet published his Handbook of Phonetics in 1877, which is exactly the year in which Edison patented the phonograph, which is the real tool, actually, from that time on, that enables you to record on your wax cylinder the nuances of speech. Just at the same time, you're able to transcribe them through increasingly complex notational systems. So in the way in which Higgins in the play is able to discriminate his 130 different sounds, so he's able to record them on his cylinder and also to transcribe them. And it's the ability to play them back, actually, as Higgins does to Pickering, which is a real advance.
In Hampshire, Hereford, Hertford, hurricanes hardly ever happen.
Hardly ever happen.
Hardly ever happen.
Oh. Certainly, elocution was seen as a kind of cheapening of the art, whereas professors of elocution were increasingly self-styled professors. They kind of gave themselves their own credentials, and they taught often a kind of artificial notion of correct speech.
Rain comes from the clouds. Look at those black clouds, how fast they move along. Now they've hidden the sun. They've covered it up just as you cover up your face when you throw a handkerchief over it. There's a little bit of blue sky still. Now there's no blue sky at all. It's all black with the clouds.
Now listen carefully, Eliza. How kind of you to let me come. Say it.
How kind of you to let me come.
Listen again.
Locations are very important in this play, with their associated accents and manners. And it's here in Wimpole Street, associated like neighbouring Harley Street with the professional middle classes, that we're to imagine Professor Higgins having his laboratory and his comfortable bachelor apartment.
The moment I let a woman make friends with me, she becomes jealous, exacting, and a confounded nuisance. So I'm a confirmed old bachelor and likely to remain one. Coffee?
Thanks. You know what I mean. I hope it's understood that no advantage is to be taken of her position.
What, that thing? Sacred, I assure you.
Everybody suspects Higgins of having some romantic intent, and he denies it throughout, and quite vehemently. Rather interestingly, the way he says it to his mother is, I've been spoilt for pretty young girls, so on. The only sort of person I could really love, he says to his mother, is someone like you.
The artistic, bohemian connotations of a Chelsea location were a nuance which the film lost when it replaced a strong, independent Mrs. Higgins with a much more conventional motherly figure.
The stage directions in Act 3 really place Mrs. Higgins as a woman brought up on a diet of Burne-Jones and Morris. This is emphasized by Shaw's call for a portrait to be placed of Mrs. Higgins in her youth when she defied fashion by wearing pre-Raphaelite Rossettian-style costume. By the time of the play, however, she's gone beyond feeling that she has to respond to fashion by dressing alternatively. In fact, she sees herself as a woman able to do what she wants. Really the most strong-willed and independent woman of the play.
Miss Doolittle.
In the film, the drawing room doors close like a genteel trap. Yet the play stresses that even before she meets her Pygmalion, Eliza has begun to climb up the London social ladder towards an independent livelihood in the Kensington flower shop of her dreams.
The shop is in the arcade of a railway station not very far from the Victoria and Albert Museum. And if you live in that neighbourhood, you may go there any day and buy a buttonhole from Eliza.
I want to be a lady. Lady. I want to be a lady in a flower shop.
I think Eliza always has great wit, and she's very streetwise, she's very canny, and that develops more and more and becomes more sophisticated as the play develops.
I want to be a lady in a flower shop instead of selling at the corner of Tottenham Court Road. But they won't take me unless I can talk more genteel.
She initiates the transformation. It's she who goes to Higgins and asks for lessons.
How can you be such a foolish, ignorant girl to think you could afford to pay Mr. Higgins?
Why shouldn't I? I know what lessons cost as well as you do, and I'm ready to pay.
How much?
And I think the transformation is about the power of money to turn things into their opposites. It's Colonel Pickering is paying for the transformation. She has new clothes bought for her from Whiteley's, that money can buy class.
Now, Eliza, the new things have come for you to try on. Oh, don't rush about like that, girl.
Pickering, we've taken on a stiff job. Higgins, we have.
There is no intrinsic breeding in Eliza or in Freddie or in any of the other characters in the play. It is something that you can be trained to and which can be bought with money.
Of course, the famous transformation scene, the ball scene, is not part of the original play. The transformation scene in the original is the Tea Party scene.
I think there are two transformations that at the Tea Party, Eliza is able to parrot the language of the upper classes, which is what Higgins is able to teach her. But what he hasn't been able to teach her is the manners at the tea party, she is a sham. She's parroting.
The rain in Spain, they say, stays mainly in the plains.
I think that is very much about the gullibility of the rising middle classes, that what she says is complete nonsense or completely inappropriate. And yet they can be gulled by Higgins into believing that this is the new fashionable slang.
My aunt died of influenza, so they say. But it is my belief as how they done the old woman in.
And there is another transformation at the very end of the play where he says, I knew I'd make a woman of you. And I think it's the final scenes that she comes to life like the statue.
I won't be passed over.
Then get out of my way, for I won't stop for you. You talk to me as if I were a bus.
So you are a bus, all bounce and go, and no consideration for anyone.
It wasn't until just a couple of days before the premiere that Shaw discovered Pascal had given his film an ending quite contrary to the impression made seconds before of a strong, real woman rather than a statue.
Dirty. You wash my face and hands before I come on it?
I shall make a duchess of this draggle-tailed gutter snipe.
Oh!
In 6 months, in 3 years.
I washed my face and hands before I came.
Films need a good ending, of course, and perhaps the times needed a hope of domestic bliss to come. So back she comes to her creator and master, tender, submissive, and ready to adore the back of his hat and pander to his every whim.
Where the devil are my slippers, Eliza?
And what the devil would the suffragettes have made of that? The ending of the film had escaped Shaw's influence. But there had always been elements in the play beyond his conscious intention.
In Shaw's personal life, the relationships he had with women fell into a very distinct pattern, didn't they?
Yes. What he did when he was excited about some woman was have an ejaculation of words from which plays were conceived and parts were born for those women on the stage. So it was all displaced in a very clever way. But that was also a defense. And not all women were pleased by his way of making love, as it were, this platonic romance. I think he was very vulnerable to women, but would not go through the pain that he had gone through with his mother again. He would not become vulnerable again. There is a surface of romantic comedy, and there is a subtext, particularly in the stage directions, which come out more in the film, of romantic tragedy, actually. And that's what makes the play work so well. There is that tension between the two.
What about Mrs. Patrick Campbell, the actress who played Eliza? Here, surely the boot was on the other foot.
That's true. Shaw had been dazzled by Mrs. Patrick Campbell when he was a theatre critic and watched her on stage from the stalls. And he certainly wrote Eliza Doolittle for her. And she rather fell for the play because there weren't that number of really good parts for women in those days. But the thing was that he fell really desperately in love with her. He was in his mid-50s, she was in her late 40s. Is there no end to love affairs, he said, but this one was serious. And he really would have gone all the way with her and made it a real romance, a real affair, but she this time backed off. And during the rehearsals of Pygmalion, she went off and married someone called George Cole Wallace West, an innocuous, hyphenated man, rather like Freddie Ainsford Hill. Shaw was mortified. He was really hurt. This was the time when he said, I condescended to romance. And he was really, I think for 2 or 3 years, quite devastated, because this is what he'd been protecting himself against all these years, and it had happened.
And did it confirm him in his belief that romance was a dangerous territory?
He thought it was essential romance, and that each of us could tolerate about 10 minutes of it in a lifetime.
Do you fancy a career, or are you already working in health and care? If so, whether you're a nurse in a high-tech hospital or a care worker helping people at home, the series Working in Health and Care is for you. There's a range of programmes designed to help you with your work, your studies and your career. Catch Working in Health and Care on BBC Learning Zone, weekdays from 5 to 6 a.m. until the 1st of February.
For a copy of the current BBC Learning Zone programme guide, send an A4 stamped addressed envelope with stamps to the value of 33p to BBC Learning Zone, room 2560, White City, London W12 7TS.
You are my world.
With the release of the acclaimed film of her life, BBC One brings you a woman who had it all.
I think that love is the most important thing.
A best-selling writer with a magnetism that gave her an unlikely sex appeal, and a devoted husband who supported her zest for life.
They are an old couple and they recognise it.
Her novels inspired a generation, and then her brilliant mind was shattered by Alzheimer's.
It was like the story was slipping away from her.
Iris Murdoch, Strange Love, Wednesday at 10:35 on BBC One.
Well, when I first saw myself in the mirror, I must have been, I was in shock. But I imagine that after a few days of doing this, that I'll just come to accept that's what I look like. Oh my God. Oh, look at me.
How would changing your colour change your life? Is race only skin deep? Trading Races starts Tuesday 29th of January on BBC Two.
The thing about paying your TV licence by direct debit is that it's a great way of spreading the cost.
Right, so how did
Do you know how little it can cost a month?
Yes, I do.
Have a guess.
But I know.
No, but have a guess, though.
No, but I know the answer. It's just over £9 a month.
No, but have a guess.
Well, all right, £15.
£15? That's rubbish.
Okay, 12. No, 300.
To find out how little it can cost to pay your television licence by direct debit, call 0800 328 2020. And to give you a start, the answer's just over £9 a month.
Good morning, time to welcome in the week with a whole load of fun now on BBC Two as Michael and Liam bring you CBBC.
Morning! Good morning, you're watching The Breakfast